How's it going, everybody? I'm Drifty from Driftwood Gaming. Welcome back to an RPG Maker MV tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to look at an alternate way to do our main menu system. Create a custom menu based on whatever Photoshop image we want to use for our menu and whatever graphics we want. To start off, I'm going to press M. It's going to open up our menu. I can press down and cycle through. If I press down on the last one, it goes to the top. If I press up at the top one, it goes to the bottom. And you can create as many different things you want right here. You can have other pictures being drawn, but basically what's happening is I'm playing an animation where I'm drawing a picture and moving a picture to. I'm just using a variable to control where the image is drawn and the animation is played. It's all functional, so if we press enter on items, it's going to push our item scene and we'll be able to do our stuff with our items. If I press enter on skills, it's going to go to the skills. We can toggle through our characters with Q and W. If I go to equip, there's your equip scene, and of course you can imagine a save. It's going to work there. If I press escape on the menu, it's going to return me to the map, and it's going to remember my coordinates because I'm using Yanfly's button common events. So if I press a button, it's going to run a common event, which is going to store the player's location in a couple of variables. So we'll stand here, press M, then we press escape, and it puts us back to where we were. Pretty cool. We can use this map anywhere we want, and it's not going to mess anything up. It's basically an alternative to using the main menu that you can see, and it's actually not that hard to do. Let's go ahead and jump into the project and see how to do something like this if it's interesting to you. Follow along. Before we get started, let's look at the plugins you will need. Not too many, luckily. All you need is Yanfly's core engine and Yanfly's button common events. So those two plugins, pretty much all you really need. If you would like to get the animations, you can use my Place Animation plugin if you would like to create that same kind of animation effect. This is optional. This is an optional plugin that you can use. First of all, let's create our common event. Once we create our common event, we can jump into the plugin and set that common event to be ran when we press a button. Well, I'm using 58. You can use any number you like. We're just going to call this transfer to menu or something like that. We're going to create a new conditional branch. Inside this conditional branch, we're going to check to see if the switch is on. So just create a new switch, call it menu controller start or something like that. Check to see if it's on, and we're going to be using a create else branch as well. After that, we're going to be drawing a picture. When we call this menu, it may seem like, well, why are we erasing a picture that we don't have yet? It will come. We will be drawing a picture, but mainly this is to set up what number we're going to use for our image. This image is going to be our cursor. As a matter of fact, I can add a comment for that. In our common event, if menu controller start is on, we're going to run a series of things. The first thing we're going to do is erase picture whatever number you selected for your cursor image number. It's completely arbitrary. I picked a high number because I think I already have other images being drawn at different times. So if you're not using any draw pictures, you can just use one. We're going to change the transparency to off because when we go to the menu, we're going to make the players completely invisible, which will turn our transparency on. We're starting backwards here. We're starting with the common event, the setup. We know we're going to make the players transparent. We're going to turn that off. We're going to be drawing a picture. We're going to erase that picture. We're going to show an animation. This is completely arbitrary. You can do this or not, sound effects, whatever kind of flash you want. But what you have to do is control switch, and we're going to turn it off. You should already have created this in this condition right here. It's the same thing. So we're saying when we call this common event, if this is on, do all these things and then turn off the switch. But before we finish this, we need to do a transfer player. We're going to do a transfer player. Now here's where we're going to create three variables. Instead of selecting a direct location, we're going to designate where we're going to be transporting the player based on three variables. Create three variables now. We're going to be using one for map ID, one for the player's X, and one for the player's Y. So you should probably name them appropriately so that you can keep track of what is what. I'm using one for map menu, map ID, map menu player X, map menu player Y, using this naming convention. It's a little bit harder to get thrown off track if you name them correctly. We're going to use retain our direction, so whatever direction we were facing, we'll keep that. And the fade is just arbitrary, none, black, white, it doesn't matter. Just hit OK on that. On the else handler, we're going to control three variables, the three variables we just created, and it's really easy to do that. You select the one for map menu player X. You're going to use the operation of set on the game data, and you're going to select character player map X and hit OK. Do the same thing. You could actually copy paste it if you want and then just change this from map X to map Y. And then you do one for map ID, which will be game data, map ID. It'll be on the other tab. We're setting three variables, and then we're transferring the player. So here is where we're going to create a new map. Before you can tell where to transfer your player, you have to create a new map. Well, let's look at that map. Here's our custom menu, and it's basically just a map. That's all, with a parallax background. So let's edit this and look at the parameters of this map. Well, I called it custom menu. If you want it to display, you can. It doesn't really necessarily need anything right there. there. The tile set doesn't really need anything unless you want to use the tile set. You absolutely can. You probably want it to be a tile that the player can't walk around on. Also want it to be using the same width and height of the resolution of the game. That's why we want to use the Yanfly's Core plugin, so that we can change the resolution of the game to match the image that we create for the background of the menu. If you're using 1280 by 720, then you can use 27 by 15 on the width height. You'll have a little bit of extra width. 27 is, it's more like 26.5 for that 16 by 9 aspect ratio with 1280 pixels. You get a little bit extra. You could use 26 if you want to clip the end of it. A cleaner look would be probably just drawing a little bit bigger image to match 27. Really, you can change the size of your image to be whatever you want it to be. In order to get the image on the background, we're going to use Parallax Background. So click the 3 dots under Image, select the image that you created for your menu. If you haven't created one yet, I will put a download link to this one in the description below. You probably, I mean, if you're going to learn how to do this, you're going to want to make your own custom images. You can go to Photoshop or GIMP, create your own images to make this work for your specific purpose. It's really, this is a template for you to use and modify and make it much better than this mediocre example. We've got our map, which is an image. We've got our common event and we've got our plugins. Let's set up our controller events. The first thing we're going to do is create a controller start, which is going to set the trigger of auto run. As soon as you enter this map, this is going to happen first, then it's going to erase event at the end. The first thing you want to do on another map, whatever map the player actually starts on, it's very unlikely that you're going to start the player in the menu from the first thing the player sees. If that is the case, then you want to change menu access, disable right at the beginning, but most likely you're going to start the player on like Forest of Beginnings, whatever, you know, whatever map you start them on, you want to do an auto run, not an erase event. You want to do auto run on that map with a self switch so that it only runs once, and then, you know, it disables the menu so the player, when they hit escape, your other menu is disabled because we're using our custom one, right? If you are starting the player in the menu at the very beginning, then you can put it here. Most likely you won't do that. So now we need to set up the instance of the custom menu. We're going to change our transparency on. Remember, when we call the common event and enter this, it's going to turn it off. When we exit it, it's going to turn it off. We're turning it on when we enter this map each time. We're controlling a variable and we're setting map menu controller to 0. Create a variable and we'll call it map menu controller or whatever you want, and we're going to set it to 0. Here is where we pick our picture numbers. We're going to show a picture next. Select a number, the same number that you set in your common event. If you used 1, use 1 here. If you use 77, use 77 here. They all need to be the same picture number, because when you draw or move or erase, they're referencing a number, not the actual image. Select whatever image you want to be for your cursor. I created this image using Yanfly's icon generator. I think that's where I got this. You can use Yanfly's icon generator or use your own cursor. Really doesn't matter. Set the origin to center or whatever you want it to be, depending on the image, and scale it depending on the image size. This is a very arbitrary part to where you want the cursor to be is up to the background image. Now I'm selecting 475 and 75 for the XY because that's exactly where I want the button to appear from the beginning. This will be 475 pixels from the left of the screen and 75 pixels down from the top of the screen. I'm drawing this image at 1/5 of its width and height at this location, positioning it in the center, showing full opacity with the screen blend mode. All of this is going to be changed depending on what you want and where you want it to appear, but this is the method that you'll go about doing so. Once you've drawn your picture, we want to control a switch. The menu controller start switch that we selected to turn off in our common event, we also did a conditional branch at the beginning to see if it's on. This is where we turn it on. At the beginning of the menu, we're going to control this switch and turn this switch on. Then we're going to erase this entire event using an erase event. Now what happens when you do this erase event means it's going to run this once and it's going to get rid of it temporarily. That way the game doesn't lock up and completely freeze. But we want this to come back every time we leave this scene and come back to this scene or this map. We don't use a self switch, because if we did a self switch in a new page, it would run a single time, the menu would work a single time, and that would be the end of our menu system. We use an erase event so that we can keep coming back to the menu. Now obviously more needs to happen, but we don't want to have that all in an auto run because we need it to be checking every frame of the game if we press a button for something to happen. We create another event. This time it's a trigger of parallel process. What we are doing here is we're checking to see where the cursor should be and move the image to that location. In order to tell where we want the cursor and where the cursor should be, we're going to use a variable to control the locations of each item. I'm using 4 things here, so I've got 4 values inside of a variable. If you have 5 things, then you would just add an additional condition of map menu controller equals 4, equals 5, equals 6, for however many instances of things that you want to happen in locations where the cursor should be. At the beginning, it is defaulted to 0, so it will be set to here. It's going to move the picture to where it originally draws it. At the beginning, map menu controller is going to equal 0. We're going to move the picture using a move picture. And remember to use the same number as the erase picture that you're referencing and the draw picture that you're referencing, or it will not work. You can change the size of your cursor and the location of your cursor. You want to set the duration to 1 frame and wait for completion. This seems to work best for me. It feels very responsive. You could try to remove the weight completely, but I found this works nice. So you can also change the way it looks if you want the image to change. You can do that. It's really up to your preference here. We're changing X and Y location, size of it, opacity, the way it looks. I'm keeping it very consistent, so I want the cursor to remain the same. Width, height, opacity, blend mode. The only thing that I want to change is the image to snap and move to different locations as I press up and down quickly at that. We copy this and we paste it. We edit this one and say, if instead of 0, we're going to say if map menu controller is equal to 1. If that's the case, then we're going to edit this. Change the Y location. For me, I'm just going down. Your menu can go left or right. It can go diagonal. It could really, it's open to you however you want to interpret this system. I'm keeping it very simple and just moving the cursor down, but you can change it up. In order to move the cursor down, you will add to Y. If you want to move the cursor to the right, you will add to the X. If you want to go to the left, you subtract from the X. If you want to go up, you would subtract from Y. Very, very simple. If you're not sure how X and Y location works, inside the DG Place Animation plugin, which you can find on my website, there's a quick description of how to tell where and what X and Y locations you can get. So if you want to draw something on the top right, it would be X of 1280 and Y of 0. If you want something in the middle, it'd be closer to these numbers, and so forth and so on. You can use this plugin description to help guide you. Of course, this is using 1280 by 720, 16 by 9, standard HD. You can also change this up depending on your settings inside of Yanfly's core engine. Copy paste map menu controller condition and check to see if it's on 2 now. If it's on 2, then we're going to say that it's going to the next location. At this point, it will be on the equip one. 0 for items, 1 for skills, 2 for equip. You kind of have to play with these numbers a little bit and try different numbers until you get it to draw where you want it to draw. Once you get it, you can use those numbers. And there's a reason why we're doing this first, because the next thing, you're going to want to have your numbers locked down before you go to the next thing. Get your numbers locked down when you're setting up the draw picture, and it'll make the next part very easy, well, easier. Copy paste that again and do the same thing, and this is for every new instance of code you want to run. For each option that they can do in the menu, you'll need one of these. And that's pretty much it. Finally, make sure that the switch conditions for menu controller start is set to on. That way this parallel process does not start until the first controller start runs. Underneath that, we're gonna need one more. This is the main event, basically. This is going to check every frame of the game to read our inputs. So if we press something, you want it to happen right then and there, continually happen. This is our read event. This is a parallel process below the player. It also requires a switch to be on, the menu controller start, which is the only switch we really need. In this event, we're going to check for inputs and play animation only when the image moves. We're going to basically run some things that happen for each input. To start off, when the player is pressing down, we're going to run a script. We're going to do a conditional instead of a script call. We're going to do a conditional branch, and the conditional branch is going to check if we're pressing something. Now, the reason why I didn't use the button is pressed down, because it's going to run the button. It's using is pressed instead of is triggered. When we use is triggered, it's only going to check if it's just happened. Instead of using if the player is pressing down button, we want to use is triggered to see if the player has just pressed it, not if it's being held, because if it's being held, it just jumps around really crazy. We'll just use a script call, use capital I on input dot is capital T on triggered, open up some parentheses, do a single quotation, type in down, do another quotation and another parentheses. That's it. This is a conditional branch checking if down is triggered. If that's the case, what we're going to do is control a variable in order to move the cursor. Control a variable, the map menu controller variable, use the operation of add, we're going to do a constant of 1. This entire part is completely dependent on if you're going to be using the optional plugin DG_place animation or not. If you're not going to be playing animations when you move the cursor, this entire part is unnecessary. It's a lot of copy paste going on. Once you set it up, you copy for each button. If you want it to show animations when you move your cursor, sound effects, because the sound effects are in the animations, then what we're going to do is another conditional statement, checking to see where the cursor is currently at when we press down. We're adding to that variable no matter where it's at, but we need to know where to draw. We got our coordinates locked down. We're using a plugin command to call the plugin. We're typing in place anim, capital P, capital A. We're putting the number of the animation, so I'm calling animation number 595. You can design your own animation in the animation editor or use one that's already built in. And then we're going to be typing in an X location and a Y location, and then 00. If you're not sure what numbers to use, just reference the numbers that you already used. Go back to draw images event, which is right above it. Look at the location you're drawing your pictures. You can play your animations in the same location that you drew your pictures. If they don't line up, try to edit the image first. If not, then you can just add to the X or to the Y or change them however you want. Once you understand the system, you can see how it kind of works very nicely together. Our X and Y locations are going to be 47560 for 0, 475240 for 1, and the only thing that's changing in mine, since it's just going up and down, is the Y location. So we're using 60, 240, 440, 650, and you can change those to be whatever you want. Placing an animation at that same location that we're moving the image to. Inside this first one, it's actually using an else branch. But if it's set to 0, then we're going to play an animation at this location. Otherwise, if it's set to 1, play an animation at this location. Otherwise, if it's set to 2, play an animation at that location. Otherwise, if it's set to 3, you see the process, and you will just add another else if this, else if that, for every option you have in your menu. And that's basically it. Once you've set this part up, you can copy paste this entire thing. Maybe add a comment so that you can separate it and be a little more organized when we're pressing up. So the only thing we're changing now is the code here from down to up. So input.isTriggered up, and if that's the case, then we're gonna change this from adding to subtracting. Control variables, now don't get confused right here. If we press down, we want it to add to that variable so that it moves the menu down. If we press up, we're gonna subtract so that it goes up. Control variables, map menu controller, and we're gonna add a constant of -1, or we can subtract 1. That makes it will do the same thing. You can add a -1 or subtract 1. Subtracting 1 is the same as adding a -1. If map menu controller, and like I said, you just copy paste. So this is all the same. None of this needs to even be changed at all. Now we've got our up and our down control. If you want to do left or right, you can do the same thing. You may have to change the way you add to your variables. Maybe add, it depends on how you, that's why I did a simple up and down to make it a little bit more clear. Now if we press up and we're at the top, we kind of want the button to jump to the bottom. Very simple logic. We're gonna say if map menu controller is less than 0, then we're gonna control the variables and set it to 3. Or if you had more, you would set it to the highest number so it jumps to the bottom. Very simple. At that same time, draw it at this location because it's always going to draw at this point, right? But I just copy pasted it to make it simple. The cursor is at the bottom and we press down, we kind of want it to jump back to the top. You can just copy paste that thing you already created. Otherwise, you can specifically say, I know it's gonna be at the bottom, so draw the image at the top because we're moving to the top. Either way, it's very flexible. Now we need to decide what happens when we want to leave the menu. What do we do? So we're going to use the escape key, the cancel. We want to cancel out of the menu to get out of the menu. Use triggered instead of pressed, just works better. Input.isTriggered, and we're going to put cancel inside of here. Now, when we do that, we have to get rid of the picture, otherwise it'll stay on the screen when we leave our menu. We need to change our transparency off so that we can see our players again, and we need optionally to throw some spice in there, some animation, some flash, sound effects, whatever you want to do. You need to, for sure, control the switch, menu controller start off. Then we're going to finally transfer the player, and we're going to use those 3 variables for map menu, map ID, player X, and player Y. Check to see where the picture and cursor, we can actually add some functionality to our menu. Run a conditional branch saying input.isTriggered OK. So if we press OK, we need to tell this event where the button is at when we press enter. So we're going to use that variable to determine where we're at once again. If map menu controller is set to 0, then optionally play an animation, do a script call. So this is how you move to another scene. You use capital S on scene. We're doing a script call on the page 3. Capital S on scene, capital M on manager.push, and in parentheses, we do capital S on scene underscore capital I on item, close the parentheses and do an inline. That's going to move to your item scene. If you don't want your items on top, you can put whatever you want there. You don't have to have items on top. You can do skills first. You can call a different common event here. You can really do whatever you want. This is just an example. When you press enter on the first thing, I want it to open up my items, but you may want it to, I don't know, open up a map or something, which you can do right here. We can copy paste this section, the condition that's checking the variable, change the check for the variable so that if it finds a 1 when it checks for it, the same animation can play, or a different one, up to you. Do the next thing, whatever you want here. I'm just saying open up the skills right here. Scene manager.push, scene skills, scene skill, singular, or it'll crash if you put S. Undefined is what it'll tell you. And you copy paste the same thing to the next thing to 2, and then have it do the next thing. In my case, scene equip 3. The next thing I'm calling scene save. You can do scene load. You can have as many different things in your menu as you want. That's pretty much it. You need to make sure that the switch condition is set to have menu controller start on, so it doesn't just run without having the initialization phase. This is a parallel event, so you have 2 parallel events and 1 auto run. We'll go over it real quick. You have the trigger of auto run with an erase event. Then underneath that, you have a parallel, and then you have another parallel. This is to do the picture picture, and this one is to check your key press. Now, you may be thinking, why do you have multiple parallels? Shouldn't you just put this in all in one? Well, you can, but you're gonna have a little delay in response time if you put both of these two parallels together. Just take my advice and separate them. It's not going to cause much more strain on your system when you're loading a small map like this. Do it however you want, but this is a very good little template for you to make your custom menus. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. Right at the beginning of the game, in your first map, you disable that menu so that you don't have two menus in your game, unless that's what you want, I don't know. Disable that and then you get rid of this. So this, once it's been disabled, it will not work for the rest of the game until you enable it. I press escape, nothing happens. Go into your plugins for Yanfly's button common events and go down to the button you want to press to call your menu. I'm using M to call my menu. I used common event number 58. You can use any common event number you want. Just remember the one that you put your common event in, put it in here. When I press M, it will play common event number 58. And 58 says transfer to menu. 58, once again, is saying if this is on, erase that picture, turn off the transparency, play an animation, turn the switch off, and transfer the player back to where he started. Otherwise, select the map X, map Y, and map ID of the player and transfer the player to the menu. So at the beginning of the game, the menu is disabled. I press escape, nothing happens. But if I press M, it loads the menu. And I can move up and down, and it's very responsive. If I press escape, it takes me out, it remembers my position. If we go here, go to our equip, we can use our equip, press escape, escape, and there you have it. Custom menu. Hopefully you guys liked it. If you did like it, please give this video a thumbs up, like, favorite, share, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Thank you guys so much for backing me on Patreon. Everybody who has done so, you guys are awesome. Please continue to back me on Patreon, and if you're interested in supporting what I do on this channel, backing me on Patreon is an excellent way to show your support for the channel. If you are unable to support monetarily, I would still appreciate your support. If you come join us on the Discord server, just come hang out, say hi, say you like what we do here. That would mean a lot to T and I. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy this, give it a thumbs up. We'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.